Another group of organisms, microscopic again, primarily I should say microscopic. Some of these actually get large enough to where we can see them visually, at least their bodies we can see visually. This other group that I'm beginning to discuss now are called the fungi. Well, are fungi primarily heterotrophic or autotrophic types of plants? Well, they're going to obtain their food from dead and decaying organic material also, and in some cases living host plants. So they fit into this heterotrophic category. And being heterotrophs, they can be either parasites or saprophytes as we previously defined. The fungi, now that we know something about bacteria, the fact that they're single-celled organisms, they reproduce by binary fission, simple cell division alone, we can compare these fungi to the bacteria. These fungi are larger types of organisms. They are still considered a form of plant life. They have an actual body, and instead of reproducing by simple binary fission or cell division, they will generally reproduce by a mechanism which is called spores. So these spores are asexually produced parts of this plant, and they're typically isolated or being produced in specific reproductive structures on the plant. So now I think you can see from this brief explanation that fungi would be thought of as being higher from an evolutionary standpoint, forms of plant life. They're larger, they're multicellular, they reproduce by spores. These spores are produced in fruiting structures. General term for that is called a sporangium, an area inside of which the spores are going to be produced. And due to this, we think of these as not necessarily being more prevalent, but being much more identifiable from a standpoint of their part they have in this organic matter material, in this organic matter cycling, I should say. So these fungi are multicellular, much larger in size, belong to several different diverse groups of fungi, which really is not important to us for the purpose of this class, but they have a body, a vegetative body, and these cells that make up this body are called hyphae. These hyphae together form a mass of tissue which is called a mycelium. So we have hyphae, vegetative cells, forming the entire vegetative body of the fungal organism, which is called a mycelium. And then from this mycelium, we will get the reproduction, or we will get the presence of reproductive structures being produced, and inside of these we'll have spores produced. Now these spores can last for extended periods of time in the soil. These organisms can live part of the time on dead and decaying organic material in the soil and then revert over to their parasitic stage and actually be causing disease or disease-like symptoms in host plants. And all of these fungi are quite important in the organic matter fraction of the soil. They, like the bacteria, can be very important as primary decomposer organisms in terms of the initial breakdown of this organic material in the soil. One other characteristic I think worthy of noting is that the fungi prefer a more acidic, meaning a lower in pH soil in comparison to the bacteria. So as we progress into the units on soils and soil pH, and we have just for now I'll basically say that the pH is of course the acidity or alkalinity of a soil. It's measured on a scale of 1 to 14, with 7 being neutral. So if we're talking about soils that are less than 7 in pH, those would be considered acidic, although very few people from a management or practicality standpoint will consider a soil, for example, at 6.5 to be an acidic soil. That is still considered in the range of neutral. But as we progress down into pHs of 6 and below, down into the high 5s, then that would be considered a much more acidic soil, and we would expect that the fungi might be more prominent in that type of soil than they would, say, in one where the pH was at neutral, 7 or above, maybe even approaching up into the high 7s or 8 range. Bacteria are more tolerant of wider ranges of soil pH than are the fungi. Bacteria can live and reproduce and grow very well at pHs of down in the middle 5 range, but on the other side of it, they can also do fairly well at pHs up at 8 and even above. So the fungi, we would find typically higher quantities of these in soils which have an acid pH. Well, what types of soils are going to have acid versus those that are going to have basic pHs? When soils are first developed, they typically start out at neutral or above in pH in most cases. Now, as they go through a period of development and formation, there are weathering and chemical processes or alterations that take place that cause these soils to go down in pH. That's the most typical. There are always going to be exceptions to this, but most typically pH will go down in these soils over time due to weathering, leaching, and the production of acids in the soil by several different processes. This is going to cause these soil organisms, the fungi in particular, to become more prevalent in soils that are more highly developed or weathered. Well, where are those going to exist? We would expect those to exist in higher precipitation or higher rainfall zones where we have adequate temperature for soil weathering and development to take place. So this is kind of a long explanation for what I'm really trying to get to here, which is that in higher rainfall zones, which is typical of higher elevation and or even mountainous terrain, we expect those soils to be lower in pH, and there those fungi are going to play an ever-increasing role in terms of their importance in that organic matter breakdown and cycling.